So I seem to be doing a run of videos about different public figures at the moment, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Sometimes it's just a run of things together. And I normally don't do that, but I only pick them out when I think that there is something that needs to be addressed about them, not the person themselves, but what they're saying. And one of these things that I feel like I need to talk about again is about Glenn Greenwald and his denial that he is transphobic. I go by what people say and their actions. If they're a politician, of course, I go by their actions. But in the case of, say, a journalist, what's coming out of their mouth is important to me. And when Glenn Greenwald recently showed a video of a trans woman who was basically making some unfortunate comments about how when somebody misgendered her, she would say, "Look, don't worry about it," and move on. But then she said she would take down their names, and then she would then she said that she would keep it for a time when it might come in useful. I guess that's to coerce someone or whatever, which is a very unfortunate thing. I don't know anyone who does that, and I certainly don't know any trans people who do that. And and unfortunately, Glenn Greenwald, in his this video, he's talking about the recent Young Turks issue, where there's a big, you've heard all about it, and I'm not going to rehash it. Unfortunately, the main issue there with if I may just digress for a moment about this trans woman and Glenn Greenwald, the whole issue was really about Erin Mate being smeared by Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, basically implying or stating, basically implying that he's working for the Assad government or the Russians or something like that, which is a terrible smear. And that's when people start basically attacking your character instead of actually what you're doing, or they make up big whoppers like that. They have no content. They have no argument. Unfortunately, it blew up into some big thing, and then Anna Kasparian tried to blackmail. Anna Kasparian sent Jimmy Dore an email saying that he had once said to her when she bent over and she was wearing a thong and a short skirt or something, and Jimmy Dore said, "Oh, nice news skirt," because she was working in the news in the office there at the Young Turks, and he said it was an inappropriate thing for him to say, and so he sent her a card and apologized for it, and he realized he'd embarrassed her because people around were laughing, and they kind of understood that it was, they kind of thought that was a funny comment, and so he apologized and sent her a card. So anyway, when she wrote to him after this whole thing with Erin Mate blew up, because Jimmy Dore was kind of also critiquing the Young Turks about their imperialist positions on things and how they're just basically part of the mainstream media, etc. Anna Kasparian wrote Jimmy Dore and said that basically she was going to blackmail him with this incident, and also distorted some other comment he made about wanting to get a pair of jeans for his wife and what jeans was she wearing and all this kind of stuff. So she basically said in the email she was going to put an end to his activism, basically, by kind of basically telling everybody that he's sort of a sexual harasser, and just basically doing a Me Too on him, really. But Me Too in a very extortive sort of way, kind of a coercive and extortion sort of way, really. Now, firstly, before I say what Glenn Greenwald did after using that email, I just want to say that it's really, really, really unfortunate that any woman uses this whole Me Too thing, which has already been made a mockery of by basically anybody that favors the Democratic Party, that is a sort of like an ideologue of the Democratic Party, has basically ignored the Joe Biden Tara Reid connection, where he was accused of assaulting Tara Reid. So people like Alyssa Milano, who was the big Me Too person, basically ignored that whole thing. So it's only a Me Too moment when it's somebody who you don't like, and when it's somebody you do like, then you just ignore allegedly their sexual assault of Tara Reid or whomever else. It was inconvenient to the Democratic Party and their followers, the diehard Democrats, to have Joe Biden accused of sexual assault around the time of the presidential election, even though that happened many, like in the 90s or something. And it seemed like it was very, very true, because there was documented at the time people, sort of having told different people about it and everything. So, this Me Too stuff, but the whole idea of this Me Too movement it was a good idea. And unfortunately, when people like Anna Kasparian make a mockery of it by basically disingenuously using it to blackmail somebody, that is really appalling, and it does no justice to all the real victims of patriarchy, basically. It makes a mockery of the survivors of sexual assault. And there are so many women. It's unusual to find a woman that hasn't had some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault, rape, etc., inappropriateness toward them, and all that kind of thing. It's incredibly rare. I don't know of any woman that hasn't had that. So we don't need women like Anna Kasparian using that, weaponizing that Me Too, to just get back, sort of a revenge thing, because Jimmy Dore dared criticize the Young Turks and her, and call them basically imperialists. It's an awful thing to weaponize that Me Too for that. So shame on her for doing that. And unfortunately, this is a trait of the Democratic Party and ideologues and corporate Dems, etc., who do the whole woke thing. And I don't like using that word woke because it's actually an appropriation of a black term, basically a black term, woke. So that's been taken out of context. But I'll just use this in the terms of how it's being used. The whole woke, imperialism that they sort of push via the CIA, all those woke commercial ads that they have to recruit, millennials, etc., to the CIA, intersectionalist and all of that. But once again, Anna Kasparian in particular probably considers herself a feminist, but then goes and weaponizes something that is so important, and just because somebody dared to criticize her. And this is how a lot of that is superficial in these Democratic Party spaces, which Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur and all of those, they're basically protecting the Democratic Party. And so it sort of fits in with that superficial weaponization of different movements and, different like LGBT and all of that, feminism and all of that, even though, imperialism basically destroys women and their families. There's rape and war and all of that. And yet, the Young Turks, which pushes imperialist narratives, CIA narratives, it only suits them when it suits them. It's just a superficial veneer. I hope I made sense with that, but I'm basically saying that this once again exposes the superficiality of those kinds of politics that so many of those kinds of people say they embrace and respect, etc., and yet they can so easily just discard it when it doesn't suit them. Just like Tara Reid was discarded by the Democratic Party and Democratic corporate Dems and Democratic Party ideologues. Like Alyssa Milano, she was just discarded and ignored. So anyway, so back to Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald talked about this Anna Kasparian email to Jimmy Dore, and basically said how appalling and what an abomination it was for Anna Kasparian to basically be trying to blackmail Jimmy Dore and weaponize the Me Too movement sort of thing to get back at him for criticizing her, basically, even though he'd apologized and all of that. And yes, it was inappropriate what he said to her and all of that sort of thing, but he apologized, sent her a card, and yet she was going to try and get that out there before. And fortunately for Jimmy Dore, he actually got ahead of that and told his viewers what she had sent him and what she was intending to do. So he got ahead of that particular smear. So that was fortunate for him. But anyway, so this is what Glenn Greenwald was talking about in this video of his on his channel. He has his own channel now since The Intercept. So anyway, then immediately after talking about that, Glenn Greenwald then he said, now I want to show you this. And he showed this clip, and I'll probably show you a clip of this trans woman who was basically, saying a similar kind of a thing, sort of like basically, I don't know anybody who actually, it was basically saying a similar kind of thing, weaponizing something and intending to use it, which means sort of basically kind of exert, sort of some kind of coercive measure on someone. I don't know how you could do that anyway, just because you misgender someone, but there you go.
As Jimmy was criticizing the Young Turks for having lied about Aaron being a paid agent of the Kremlin, when he got into his DM box, this message that I'm going to put on the screen, from Anna Kasparian. The first one she sent him, at least by Twitter, in 5 years since that very positive exchange last time, which said the following, quote, "I'm sure you remember when you constantly made inappropriate comments about how sexy you found me at work, and even felt the need to ask me where I shop for my jeans so you can buy a pair for your wife so she dresses better. That was followed by an apology card you wrote me for the degrading harassment. I've been holding back, letting you run your mouth nonstop as if you're some sort of warrior for what's good in the world. That's going to change." Do you see what she did there? Now, since this DM was sent, Jimmy anticipatorily went and showed his audience this threat, which is what this is, that she sent him. A threat that she's going to accuse him of sexual harassment because of the things that he's been saying about the Young Turks. And he gave his own version of events about what happened. She then went on her own program and made good on her threat by accusing him of a series of harassment. I have no idea what took place back in 2014 when they were working together because I wasn't there. But here's what so I can't comment on whether anyone did anything wrong back then, but this is what I can comment on. Anna Kasparian was not Jimmy Dore's subordinate at the Young Turks. Quite the contrary, if anything, she was quite senior to him. She's been the co-host of the main program and one of its stars from its inception, more or less. If anything, she was his boss at the Young Turks. And yet, according to her own version of events, and according to Jimmy's as well, she never once voiced a complaint about being sexually harassed by Jimmy Dore in the workplace to the Young Turks. In fact, Cenk Uygur, who's the CEO or the president of the Young Turks, said that he never heard about any of this until she made good on that threat in order to use it against him. So she never, in the course of this 7 years, uttered a peep about claiming to have been sexually harassed by Jimmy Dore. In fact, in 2016, as I just showed you, they had a very amicable exchange. He was wishing her well on her mother's surgery, and she said, "Thank you so much, and it's so great to see how much you're kicking ass." That's not the exchange that one would expect from someone who actually feels like they were maliciously and systematically sexually harassed by someone else, but maybe it is. Maybe that did happen, and for whatever reason, she decided to keep it to herself. That happens a lot where women are actually harassed or otherwise victimized, and they choose not to come forward. That's their right, and that happens a lot. That fact that someone doesn't come forward doesn't mean nothing happened. But what she's doing here is as grotesque as it is transparent. She kept it in her back pocket. And she's saying to him, "I've not said anything this whole time, but now that you're criticizing us so much from this position of purity and morality, I'm now going to use it. I've kept it to myself. That's going to change." This is reprehensible. To weaponize claims of sexual harassment against somebody as punishment for their criticism of you. It's reprehensible for two reasons. One is because it is grotesque to try and ruin somebody's reputation over something like this because you're angry that they're criticizing your politics. But it's also reprehensible because exploiting and weaponizing claims of Me Too harassment or sexual harassment harassment in the workplace destroys the credibility of actual victims who come forward for the right reasons, which is to blow the whistle on somebody and denounce somebody who actually did it. It's just the same thing the way that Israel defenders have taken what used to be a reputation-destroying accusation, which is that somebody is anti-Semitic, and through overuse of it and over-exploitation to equate criticisms of Israel with anti-Semitism, has basically trivialized that accusation so that no one really minds anymore when they're accused publicly of that because everyone knows it's exploited and overused. Same with racism accusations, same with white supremacy accusations, same with misogyny accusations. And this is what people like Anna Kasparian are doing to the important and noble progress that Me Too made, which is empowering women who have been harassed to come forward with consequences by weaponizing it in this way. Now that you're criticizing me publicly, I'm going to take this thing I've been holding in my pocket for 7 years and I'm going to use it against you. It reminds me of this video.
You do mess up somebody's pronouns. All you need to do is correct yourself and apologize. You don't need to fall all over yourself saying, "Oh God, I totally love transgender people." Now, I've had people mess up my pronouns before, and to be perfectly honest, I tend to forget about it as soon as it happens, which is why I keep a little notebook around with me so I can write down the names of who did it and when they did it, because you never know when you're going to need a little leverage from time to time.
I don't know any trans people who do that. So this is where it is problematic, because it's like making a generalization about a whole group, which is a very small group and a very vulnerable group for one person from that group who's made an inappropriate and unfortunate remark. You know, that's basically a really, I find what he did right there and then, that's Glenn Greenwald, is really, really unfortunate and as appalling as what he thinks that Anna Kasparian did to Jimmy Dore. And that's the irony of him using something like that. He just brings it out of nowhere. He could have used any number of examples, but no, he uses a trans person to do that, a trans woman, which he's already made numerous attempts to, I'll go into this in a minute, why I think he's transphobic. He's using that to sort of make out as if trans people in general are deceptive and they're coercive and they are out to get people and they're basically, you know, immoral. That's really what he was doing there. I saw it so clearly, it just kind of was like cold water in my face when the minute I saw that, and the minute I saw that excerpt that he put there with the trans woman and saying that, I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. You know, I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. And yet it wasn't surprising, because he has, it's so clear to me and to others, but it's so clear to me he is very transphobic. And I mean, and now I'll tell you some brief examples of why I think that, but this just is another attempt to vilify and demean and basically discount a whole group because he feels in some way threatened. I don't know what's his problem. I don't know, I don't know why he's so threatened by such a small group. I mean, there must be about 1 million or something trans people in the world that we know of. And as if that is some sort of threat to him. I mean, if he's so threatened by the binary or heteronormativity to him is being threatened, even though he's outside of that really, he's a gay man. So that makes it even sort of more bizarre that he cannot appreciate the minority status of trans people and how trans people are being killed, particularly in his own country. His own country, literally, it's almost a weekly occurrence where a trans woman is killed in Brazil. And, black trans women in the United States, I mean, there's been about 30, I think, trans women killed since the beginning of this year. Every year there's dozens of trans women, particularly black trans women, killed every year. And it's about time that some of the people on the left who are too afraid to either interview trans women, like I don't know if you could call George Galloway left anymore. I don't know. He's got a lot of right positions, but George Galloway has a real problem with trans people, never interviews a trans person, but is quite happy to keep on smearing them and sort of slagging off and trying to demean the whole thing. And they don't even seem to understand that trans people have been in existence for thousands of years. It's documented. It's even been documented clearly in indigenous Native Americans. They've had two-spirit people. It's a very, very common thing. And in fact, they were revered in indigenous Native American tribes. Two-spirit people, look it up. So, they pretend as if this is some newfangled sort of perverse thing that's happened in this century. And they keep pushing that narrative, basically, without actually, it's a plausible deniability. They don't come out and straight out say stuff like that, but it's how they frame things, how they talk about things like what Glenn Greenwald did just yesterday, basically equating what this woman did, that basically using her, not even mentioning that she's trans, but, you could find out. And then it's basically making out as if she's sort of some immoral being. And it's basically, the idea is to push that whole thing, that there's something wrong with trans people, that they're really, really deceptive. Now imagine if, say, Glenn Greenwald just picked out, just say he wasn't gay and he picked out an obviously gay person or a Chinese person or a black person and basically kind of put them there and them having done the same thing. And just say at that time, the time that was happening, right at this time, Chinese people are being vilified by the US national security state and people are just falling in line with that, so easily propagandized. Or just say it was in the 60s or something where, basically putting out a person just out of the blue that happens to be obviously from a minority group or whatever, from an ethnic group, and then for no reason at all, just using them as an example because they said something that was unfortunate. Using them as an example. Making out as if that whole group, basically, there's something wrong with that whole group. Imagine if he did that to a Jewish person. You know, it's so obviously a slight at a whole group by using that particular woman, that particular trans woman. And, you know, there was another example of when he was talking about censorship, and what he did was he used a very transphobic author called, her last name's Sriya, and he elevated her book, which is just full of nonsense, and it's just so hateful about trans people. He elevated her book by using her book as an example of a book that was being censored by a particular publishing company because they said it was kind of awful, basically, which it is. But instead of using, there's so many examples he could have used about censorship, but he chose to use her book, therefore elevating that content and that author. You know, this specific book that's so transphobic. And he's done numerous things like that, and he's also talked on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is another public figure, that like a podcaster who's got a huge audience, who regularly, any excuse, you could be talking about, NASA or something. And it's that ridiculous that he'd managed to find some way to bring some have a go at trans people. I mean, it's really that bad with him. And it's sort of getting that way with Glenn Greenwald, because he sort of basically is and I know, just by the look on his face before he showed that shot of that trans woman, you could just tell, you can feel it. It's a visceral thing with him. He's just has a real problem. Almost contempt for trans people. He's never interviewed one. I don't know if he knows any trans people, but this is the whole issue with people who, they're all on board with he's got a lot of other issues now, Glenn Greenwald. He's saying weird things about China. There's all sorts of problems with him now. I don't really follow him anymore because he's putting out weird narratives, and I feel like he's grifting to the right. In fact, he had a go at Antifa as if it was an organization yesterday, basically retweeting somebody who said, and there goes Antifa again, being violent towards them, and he actually retweeted that. That's the sort of thing that right-wingers, far right-wingers do, basically vilifying Antifa. That's what Trumpers do. Even though he must know Antifa is not an organization. And wearing a black outfit and a mask and traveling in a little group doesn't necessarily mean you're Antifa, and it certainly could mean you're an agent provocateur too, because we know how much the Biden administration loves the left, and the GOP loves the left. It only takes some agent provocateurs to stir up some trouble, set some things on fire, push over a bin, hassle somebody, and they're all happy to jump on board and make a big to-do about it and say how awful and how violent and how vile and un-American, in quotes, the left are, in conflating the whole thing. And so Glenn Greenwald is also doing that kind of thing now. So at this point, I don't really even consider him left anymore, because he's also, sort of saying weird stuff about China. So, when you start, retweeting somebody's obvious far right type of attitude towards Antifa, Antifa, as if it's an organization and as if it's violent, then you're sort of basically joining the Trumpers and joining the far right. And you're helping Joe Biden as well, because he wants to basically crush the left, just like the GOP wants to crush the left. Glenn Greenwald, has done some he's got some other things that he's done in relation to trans people, but he's joined with Joe Rogan, and he also, and Joe Rogan is always looking for an excuse to smear and demean and discount trans people. On this channel, there's at least one other video about Glenn Greenwald and his behavior in relation to trans people. And I'm expecting one day if he has any courage at all, he'll just come out and be really, really, really overtly transphobic. But I just see this as such a cowardly thing. Anybody, and I'm not just talking about Glenn Greenwald, I'm talking about anybody, particularly on the left, who says they're all for protecting vulnerable groups, they're all for protecting minorities, but doesn't want to understand trans people, never interviews trans people, never gets to know trans people, doesn't know what the issues are, and yet is either at best is silent or at worst is basically poo-pooing them and basically vilifying them or demeaning them or mocking them. I see that as incredibly cowardly and ignorant. One day, people will look back at their behavior, and it'll be as embarrassing as when people were demeaning and vilifying gay people and saying that gay people had an agenda, the gay agenda and all of that, and carrying on like those evangelical Christians and these Christian lobby groups. I mean, this is how some people on the left are behaving in relation to trans people. They need to fucking grow up and fucking get a clue, because people are dying because of it.